Ever feel like some ideas, they've been around forever, like we've been wrestling with them since, well, the dawn of time. Rebirth. That's got to be up there on that list, right?
It's definitely one of those concepts that pops up everywhere you look, cultures across the globe, different philosophies, heck, even video games. It's almost like it's wired into us somehow.
But what if we're going about it all wrong? Like, what if our understanding of rebirth is stuck on the wrong track?
That's a fascinating thought, and it's something this source really dives into. It takes a totally different approach, one that might surprise you.
Okay, you've got to give me a hint here. What's so different about this source's take on rebirth?
Well, it all comes down to something we experience every single day. Sleep.
Sleep. Wait a minute, is this about those nights where you wake up feeling like your brain went through a whole system reboot?
It's kind of like that, yeah. The source actually mentions this idea of interim death, and, well, that sounds awfully familiar.
Interim death. Okay, now you're just messing with me.
No, seriously.
Yeah.
The source uses sleep as an example. Think about it. Every night, our conscious minds, they basically go offline for a while. The world keeps spinning, but we're not aware of it. Then we wake up, and it's like hitting the refresh button.
Hold on. So it's not just about dozing off for a bit, this interim death. It's like our consciousness takes a break. But what happens next? Where do we go from there?
Well, this source says it's not about our exact personality or memories being reborn. It's more like our mind with all its quirks and habits. Those get carried over.
So it's more like hitting continue in a game rather than starting a brand new one.
Exactly. You find yourself facing familiar challenges, making similar choices, just based on what you've learned before, even if you don't remember every single detail.
Okay, so we carry over these patterns, these tendencies, but is the source saying that these are what actually drives this whole rebirth cycle?
That's exactly it. It's our mental patterns, the impurities, as the source sometimes calls them. They're the fuel for this whole cycle, not about some judgment or reward system, but the natural consequences of our own, let's say, mental and emotional baggage.
Okay, so if our minds are basically carrying over luggage from one life to the next, how do we unpack? How do we break free from these patterns that might not be doing us any favors?
That's where this source gets really interesting. It uses this incredibly powerful analogy to explain how it all works. Imagine a pristine lake, crystal clear, perfectly pure water.
Okay, I'm picturing it. Crystal clear, totally serene. Go on.
Now imagine we, as individuals, are like containers. Our physical form, whatever that may be, that's the container, the water. That represents pure consciousness.
I'm with you so far.
So when we're born into a new life, it's like we dip our container into that pure lake and scoop up some of that water.
But here's the catch, right? Our containers, they aren't always so clean. We bring our own stuff to the party, our own pre-existing patterns, those impurities, and they mix in with that pure water. It's like that pristine lake gets a little muddied up.
Exactly. And that's the state we carry with us. Our individual consciousness, a blend of that pure awareness, and our own accumulated impurities.
So as we go through life, our actions, the choices we make, they all influence the state of the water in our container.
You got it. We can either add more impurities through negativity, or we can work on cleaning things up, purifying the water through conscious effort.
All right, so we've got this Purify Your Water challenge going on. But if we're constantly dipping into the same lake, transferring that water into new containers with each life, how do we know if we're making any progress? What's the point of all this purifying in the first place?
That's a question many cultures and philosophies have grappled with. This source offers a really interesting perspective. It's not just about racking up good deeds like points on some cosmic scoreboard. It's about something much deeper, something more fundamental. The very nature of our minds and how we shape them through our actions, through our intentions.
So it's less about reaching some finish line and more about the journey itself.
In a way, yes. It's about this constant process of refining our minds, purifying our inner water, so to speak. It's about understanding that our actions, they have consequences, not just in this life, but potentially in the lives or forms that come after.
Okay, I'm hooked. It sounds like we're about to explore how this whole purification thing actually works. But before we get there, let's talk about this whole karma thing. This source seems to be saying it's not just some cosmic reward system. It's something way more intertwined with who we are at our core. So we ended on this idea of karma. What is this source really saying about it?
You're right. It's not about racking up points, is it? This source emphasizes that karma isn't some external system of like rewards and punishments.
Not just some cosmic slot machine where you put in good deeds and hope for the best.
Exactly. It's more about how our actions, our thoughts, our intentions, they shape us, They shape the very fabric of our minds.
So it's less about keeping score and more about understanding that what we do over and over, those choices we make, they have a real impact. They're not just isolated things.
Right. They create ripples within us. They influence who we become, who we're growing into.
So where does this purifying our inner water idea fit in with karma then?
That's the really cool part. The source takes us beyond this general idea of karma and connects it to this purification process.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this connection.
It all comes down to the qualities we cultivate, the intentions behind our actions. It's like, you know how there's certain qualities that are universally seen as positive?
Sure, things like kindness, compassion, generosity, right? Those things that just make the world a better place.
Exactly. And the source contrasts those with what it calls mental impurities, anger, greed, jealousy, all those tendencies that often create suffering for ourselves and others.
It's almost like those impurities, they muddy up the water in our containers even more.
While cultivating compassion and kindness, it's like we're adding a purifying filter.
That's a great way to put it. So it's not about being perfect, right? We're human after all.
Exactly. This isn't about denying our human emotions or striving for some unrealistic idea of perfection. It's more about recognizing those patterns we have and making conscious choices about which ones we're feeding,
So if we constantly give in to negativity, if we hold on to anger or let greed drive us, we're basically making it more likely that those patterns are going to stick around.
It's not about some guaranteed outcome in some specific afterlife, remember. It's more like an understanding that those ingrained habits of mind, they have a way of perpetuating themselves.
Like we're setting ourselves up to repeat those same patterns over and over again.
The source seems to be saying that we're not just starting from scratch with each new life. We carry the imprints of our past choices with us.
It makes you think about those moments where you react in a way that you regret later. That knee-jerk reaction, that burst of anger, maybe it's not just a random thing. Maybe it's a pattern we've been carrying for a while. And each time we indulge it, we're just making it stronger.
Exactly. Yeah. And on the flip side, every time we make that conscious effort to choose kindness over anger, to act with generosity instead of greed, we're not just doing something good in that moment. We're actively purifying that water, so to speak. Yeah. We're weakening the hold those negative patterns have on us.
It's a powerful idea, isn't it? This idea that we have the ability to shape the direction of our own minds. Not just for this life, but for whatever forms our journey might take in the future.
It is empowering, isn't it? I mean, we're not just along for the ride. This source isn't just presenting rebirth as something that happens to us. It's suggesting that we can actively participate in shaping what continues on.
But if we're not just trying to escape this cycle of rebirth, if it's not about racking up enough good karma points to get to some final destination, what's the goal? What are we ultimately aiming for according to this source? So last we left off, we were talking about the goal of all this. If it's not about escaping the cycle completely, what's the point of all this refining? What's the end game here?
Well, there's this phrase the source uses that really stuck with me. It talks about the journey from being a creature human to a divine human, and then finally to just being divine.
Okay, wow. That sounds like a pretty intense upgrade. But what does that even mean, being a divine human? Are we talking about like growing wings and hanging out on Mount Olympus?
Not quite. It's a concept that you see in different traditions, but I think here it points to a real shift in consciousness. Like imagine a state where we're not limited by those same mental and emotional patterns that often cause so much suffering, We're tapping into a deeper wellspring of wisdom and compassion.
So it's not about becoming superhuman, but more about transcending those limitations that keep us feeling stuck, right? Like we're purifying that inner water to the point where we can see ourselves and the world around us with total clarity.
Exactly. And, it's interesting because it reminds us that that same pure consciousness that exists in that metaphorical lake, it also exists within us. It's always there, but it's often clouded by our own, let's say, mental and emotional baggage.
That reminds me of something the source talked about earlier, about going from being driven by our baser instincts to becoming more awake, more conscious. Like we have this potential within us to evolve beyond our programming, so to speak.
Yes. And it's not about rejecting our humanness either, right? We don't need to become emotionless robots to be divine. It's more about experiencing that full spectrum of human emotion, the joy, the sorrow, but with a greater sense of awareness. Like we're not just reacting, we're understanding.
This whole conversation has been incredibly eye-opening. So to wrap things up, it seems like this source is saying that rebirth is less about physical reincarnation and more about the ongoing evolution of our consciousness, right? It's about those choices we make, the qualities we cultivate, and ultimately the state of that inner water we carry with us.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's a journey, not a destination. And it's a journey we're all on in our own way.
Absolutely. And that's a wrap on another deep dive. We hope you enjoyed exploring these fascinating ideas with us. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those inner waters sparkling.